BookTube. It's Roz, and it's 2 weeks into July, which means it's perfect timing from my point of view to do my mid-year, how's it gone so far? What have I enjoyed sort of review of the first 6 months of the year. So I won't do it until July because I haven't had a whole half year till then. So I'm only going to talk about things that I read between January and June. And it's loosely based on the mid-year freak out book tag that's been going around for years, and I broadly do this every year, so it's nice to have a bit of a rhythm, I suppose. But as ever, I'm going to cheat a bit and extend it a little by talking about what have been some of my favourite things, best reads of the year. I'll sort of intersperse them because the first question in this tag is, what was your best book of the year so far? Well, how could I answer that? How can you compare, a reread of Middlemarch with the latest Kang newly translated? Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't work for me. And at the end of the year, when I review the year, I do kind of categories and maybe like a top 5 or a top 10 in those categories. So I'm going to pick out a book or two for each of the categories I normally use at the end of the year and kind of intersperse them through the tag. It'll make sense as it happens. So, I will just say I've read 83 books by the end of June this year, which is, quite a lot, but not a totally unusual number for me. And the other little stat, I suppose, is that they came by authors from 33 different countries, which is kind of what I aim for. But my one big, if you were looking at what my reading goals for the year, my one complete failure so far this year is to read an author from a country that's new to me. So maybe I'll manage a bit of that in the second half of the year. But I'm not unhappy with my year's reading, and certainly kind of global fiction and books in translation has been a big theme of the year so far, one way or another. And my top 2 translated novels of the year so far would be We Do Not Part by Kang. That was translated by Paige Ania Morris and Iye Wan. And Han Kang has become one of my favourite authors, and this is a superb novel, and if you haven't read it yet, do read it. But it isn't necessarily the best book of hers to read first. So message me in the comments if you want some advice on what to read first from Han Kang. The other sort of best translated fiction of the year for me was, or recent translated fiction, was The Wind That Lays Waste by Selva Almada. It was translated by Chris Andrews. Now, it's the only part in her sort of loose thematic trilogy that I hadn't yet read, and I'm so glad I did. It takes course over the course of one day, and there's just something magic about Almada's writing for me. Perceptive, human, unusual. Now, the second question in the mid-year freak out book tag is the best sequel that you read in the year so far, and I wouldn't say that The Wind That Lays Waste was a sequel, in that although it was the first of the trilogy, but also they're not connected in that way. In another sense, or one book that sort of fits my best sequel of the year, I suppose, is this one, because this year I read The Odyssey by Homer in 2 translations, Robert Fagles and Emily Wilson. Is it technically, and I read it this year because last year I read the Iliad in 2 translations by the same 2 translators. Is it technically a sequel? Well, no. I mean, the story of the Odyssey comes after the story in the Iliad, but, we don't even know that Homer was a person. We don't know what order they were written in. It sort of doesn't make sense, but boy, was I happy that I read that in the first half of this year. I did read a true sequel, though, unusually for me, because I don't read a lot of series, and that was, strangely enough, also connected with the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Trojan War, because it was The Voyage Home by Pat Barker, which is the third part in her Trojan War trilogy, and I read it together with Gurnah of Gurnah's Bookish Adventures, and it's an excellent sequel. Next question is the new release that you've not read yet, that you're sort of most excited to read. Cheating again, I have more than one. Okay, so I'm very much looking forward to this one, Ripeness by Sarah Moss. I've got it out of the library. Steve's reading it at the moment. I'll read it next. Everyone is enthusing about this, and I've read, I think, nearly all of Sarah Moss's novels, and people say this is her best ever. So looking forward to that. An author that I haven't read before, but I'm very interested in this one, is Endling by Reva. And so she's an Ukrainian author, but she now lives in America, and she's written in English. It's not in translation. I do have a new release in translation that I'm looking forward to reading, which is The Director by Daniel Kehlman. I really loved his book Till, and I'm itching to read that. It's part of our Reading the Globe fiction selection. Not in translation, but kind of global fiction, I suppose, that I'm really looking forward to, that's a new release reading, is Theft by Abdulrazak Gurnah, which I shall read a bit later in the year, I hope with Tilly and Sean, and yeah, really looking forward to that one. So those are kind of like new releases that I'm looking forward to, but that made me think, what's the best new release that I've read so far? What's my top new release of the first 6 months of the year? And that would definitely be Days of Light by Megan Hunter. And I've enthused about it in wrap-up videos and in a standalone video, but I felt it was a really special book. I've read some other brilliant new releases, and they'll kind of, a couple of them will come up later on in answer to subsequent questions. Next question, though, is what new release you were looking forward to most. Now, I'm not a great one for sort of looking at what's coming out ahead of time and anticipating it. I notice things, when they arrive, as a rule. But I am looking forward to Helm by Sarah Hall. It's come up as a sort of, some people have, on their sort of what might be on the book along list. And I've read a couple of books by Sarah Hall, which have been first rate, and Helm appeals because it's kind of like historical fiction, sort of almost like a sort of history of Britain, but all connected with the wind, a named wind, Helm, the Helm, which is the wind in the north of England. Sounds like a real Ros book, doesn't it? Next question is it brings us to something that was definitely not a Ros book. Okay, because the question is, what was your biggest disappointment of the year so far? Easy to think of an answer for this one, because it was absolutely all fours by Miranda July. Now, and I hated this book, and it was a disappointment because I had heard a lot of buzz and excitement about Miranda July, and it was the first thing I'd read by her, and I thought I might enjoy it, and it was meant to be sort of geared at I was the right demographic for it in theory, but I would have DNF'd it if it hadn't been for the fact that I was reading it for the BookTube prize, and the deal is you don't DNF things you're reading for the BookTube prize, so I didn't, but I had to hate read the second half of it. But the BookTube prize also brought me my biggest surprise of the year so far, because I was really surprised to find that I actually really enjoyed Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Now, I read Sally Rooney before, and I didn't really get what all the hype was, but unlike Miranda July, this novel by Sally Rooney did make me understand why people rate her so highly. I thought it was a beautiful novel, really emotionally profound. There you go. The other big surprise of the year, though, was a much older book, and it was this, Desperate Remedies by Thomas Hardy. Now, I I love Hardy, but this is his first novel, and I'd never read it because I had an idea that it wasn't very good and I wouldn't like it. I don't know why I had that idea, but because Jen the Librarian's doing a sort of a read along of Hardy's novels in publication order, I picked this up and read it, and wow, did I love this book. It's a brilliant sort of Victorian sensation novel, and it was a great page turner, and really made me smile. There you go. Was it my top classic of the year so far? Possibly close, but actually I think my top, my best classic of the year so far would have to be Night and Day by Virginia Woolf. So that's from 1919, and I read it with Joe Smith. It's a lovely. I'm really enjoying reading the Virginia Woolf novels that perhaps less prominent and that I hadn't got around to. And, you just can't beat Woolf for me for standard of prose. A month when I read a Virginia Woolf always makes everything else sort of look a bit grubby in comparison. There you go. Now, next question is favourite new author of the first half of the year. And there's kind of two ways of looking at this. And one way of looking at it is if you read a debut novel by a writer and think, wow, this is a writer that I want to follow, that I want to read more of, that has the potential to be a favourite author for me. And hands down, the one for that for me was The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire. I thought that was such a clever, perceptive, honest, thought-provoking novel, and I can't recommend it enough. But to be a favourite new author for me, you can't be a favourite author if I haven't read at least 2 books by you, to know whether it's just a one-off, I love that book, or whether it's like, oh yeah, this is a writer for me. And happily, I have 2 authors that I can say are favourite new authors for me, because I've read a second book by them in this first half of the year and loved it as much as the first book that I'd read. One of those is Hisham Matar, the British Libyan author. I read My Friends, which came out last year, and was it hit every spot for me. Beautiful novel. If you haven't read it, do. The other, in a way, is even more thrilled by. This is a very recent read. Just finished it just at the end of June, and that was The Book of Records by Madeleine Thien, and it's, as I say, the second book I've read by her. And again, the previous one, Do Not Say We Had Nothing, I absolutely loved, but that was back in 2016, and I thought, oh, will this one be as good? I was, again, blown away by its wonderfulness. So there you go. 2 new authors that I can say, yes, they're a favourite author. Now, a question that I often struggle with in this book tag is it asks you about your new fictional crush. And I used to think, what on earth does that mean? But this year, I think I can confidently say what my new fictional crush is, because I read Baron Bagge by Alexander Lernet Hotenia, Austrian author. It was originally published in 1936, so, older book. Our eponymous hero, the Baron, in this book, I just completely fell for him. He's all kind of mournful and honourable and brave and just adorable. And he is my new fictional crush insofar as I do those things. That was also one of my best sort of backlist novels, I suppose, of the year. 2 more recent backlist novels that where do I draw the line between classic and backlist? I said Night and Day was a favourite classic, and that's a favourite. But well, it doesn't matter, does it? You've got a rough idea. But 2 definitely fall in the backlist sort of section category for me that I read and loved in this half of the year were one from the 1990s, and that was A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. Big, thick, almost baggy and yet wonderful book about the French Revolution, and by one of my favourite authors. And the other was more of a surprise, I suppose, because it was a book called Oromay. The author was Baalu Girma. He was Ethiopian. He wrote it in 1982, was published in 1983. It then was almost instantly banned. It was only relatively recently translated into English, and that English translation only became available in the UK this year. So, and just fascinating. You know, a book that takes you to sort of historical events that you sort of knew of and yet didn't really know, and places you right in the middle of the action, because Girma was right in the middle of the action of the Eritrean sort of rebellion and attempted crushing of it by the Ethiopians at that time, and wrote a novel about it when it was sort of still very fresh. Yeah, very interesting book. Now, easier than a fictional crush for me is the next question, which is my new favourite character. My favourite characters, from books I've read in the first half of the year. And I'm going to give you two, and they're from two books that were also, favourite books of the year, I suppose. One is Kira from Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. Now, this was another brilliant debut novel, another brilliant recent release, or relatively recent. Kira is so brave, so believable, so, felt like a person to me. I was so worried for her. It's a book about kind of coercive relationships and getting out of one. So worried for her that almost, she was keeping me awake at night. So yeah, definitely a new favourite character. Another new favourite character was not a fictional one. Okay, I read Story of a Murder by Hallie Rubenhold, and that's about Belle Elmore, and she was the wife of Dr. Crippen, so she was murdered by Dr. Crippen. But what Rubenhold does so brilliantly is bring Belle back to life in all her full glory as a wonderful, sort of creative, brave, funny woman, someone whose friends loved her, who started her life over more than once, and then was murdered, and it's Rubenhold is such a good writer of sort of social history through linking to crime, I suppose. Was that my favourite non-fiction of the year? No, I think my absolute favourite non-fiction book of the year was Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton, about a memoir about raising a hare whilst trying not to domesticate it. It was our group read for People April, and so that group read experience probably added something, but it's just a lovely book, a lovely, lovely book. I follow her on Instagram now, and I get little pictures of hares popping up, and if I could pick an animal as my favourite, new favourite character of the year, the hare in Raising Hare might have been it too. There you go. Now, next question is book that made you cry, or the saddest book that you read. Now, if I were to say the saddest novel that I read in the first 6 months of this year, it would definitely be The Book of Disappearance by Ibtisam Azem. It's also one of my sort of, up there in my favourite sort of contemporary translated books that I read this year. It's a new translation, or the book was written a few years ago, not many years, but it felt incredibly timely to read it, because it's a sort of speculative fiction, sort of, that imagines that all the Palestinians living in Israel, West Bank, Gaza, disappear overnight, and what's the impact of that. Yeah, really very, very sad, very moving book. Something that made me literally cry, and I don't do that often, was a play. and that was the Laramie Project by Moises Kaufman. It's and the Tectonic Theatre Project. It's about a homophobic murder in Laramie, Wyoming, some years ago. Just terribly moving to read, and definitely, I think that I would say that was my favourite play that I read this year. Another book that actually literally moved me to tears was a collection of poetry, and a kind of Palestinian connection with this again, because that was Forest of Noise by Mosad Abu Toha, and he's a poet from Gaza. They're very recently written and published, and really, I guess, brought home to me what it's like living in Gaza at the moment, or kind of a year ago when he was then able to leave and published his poems, but they were written when he was still living there. And yeah, I'm getting emotional just thinking about reading that book. My other favourite, that was definitely one of my top two poetry collections that I read this year. The other was a lot more cheerful, and that was The Wickedness by Caleb Femi, and new release. It's kind of about a dance party club night in London, and the people there, and it kind of tells a story through a sequence of poems. It has characters. It's just lovely, and really made me smile. Which brings me to the next question, because the next question is a book that made you happy, or books that made you happy, or made you laugh. And oddly, the book that made me laugh most, I think, was a crimey sort of novel of sorts, and that was Wild Houses by Colin Barrett. I mean, it's very much at the literary fiction end of crime, and he's it's a debut novel. He's an Irish novelist. He's written short stories before, and just the characters, it's like a crime caper, I suppose, and the characters in it, some of them are so funny, and the dialogue is just like so snappy, and it genuinely did more than bring a smile to my face. It made me chortle. The book that made me happiest reading it, though, was this one, because I reread Middlemarch this year, and by George Eliot, and that made me happy just because George Eliot writes the most beautiful prose you could possibly wish for, a bit like Virginia Woolf, magic stuff. But it also made me happy because I kind of think of it as one of my favourite novels ever, perhaps my favourite novel ever. But it was ages since I'd read it, and it was just lovely to reread it and be reassured that, yes, it really is right up there. So there we go. Another book that made me happy in a different way, because it also kind of made me sad and angry, was this one, Nishka by Jordan Abel. It made me happy because it was a present from Sean Breeze Books, who posted it to me from Canada because he knew I'd like to read it, and is not available in the UK, or not at a remotely affordable price. And it's an unusual and beautiful book about Indigenous experience, but also about the aftermath of the industrial school system in Canada, and how it sort of stole people's language and identity, and the impact of that for second and third generations beyond. So happy and sad all at once, that one. Now, while I'm thinking of Sean, this brings me to the next question, because the next question is the favourite video that you made in the year. And I'm kind of cheating when I say that the favourite video that I made was one that actually Sean made, technically. But he invited me and Tilly to have a discussion with him and with his friend but former English professor, Kathy, and we talked together about Jane Austen, and I just love that video, and he sent it to me to put on my channel as well. So I'm claiming it because I took part in it, and definitely my favourite. Do watch it. It's Jane Austen July at the moment, and it came out just for the beginning of Jane Austen July, but we made it in June, so it counts for me in the first 6 months. My other favourite is not a video; it's more like a favourite thing, and that's that I was brave enough for the first time this year to host a live show, or well, more than one now, and those were for Reading the Globe and Katya and Page Turns with Katya, because we're co-hosting the contemporary strand of Reading the Globe. We're sort of making live shows for each book alternate months. So yeah, I've sort of, I'm no longer a live show virgin, and that makes me happy. Now, the next question is about the most beautiful book that you've acquired this year, and there's I don't always kind of feel. No, let me rephrase this. I don't generally buy books because they're beautiful, if you know what I mean. I buy books that I want to read, and if they happen to be a nice edition, that's lovely, but I'm not that bothered. But there are some books that I want to keep and treasure, or give to someone else who is going to keep and treasure, and it is nice if they are beautiful. And I got hold secondhand of 2 this year that absolutely fit that category, and they're this one, Jane Austen's Letters, and this one, The Brontes, A Life in Letters. They're absolutely gorgeous Folio Society editions. They have boxes that they slip into, they're just lovely brushed paper. They're just a joy. They are things of beauty, and they're the kind of thing that I want to keep and enjoy forever. Although I may have said I'm going to give them to Tilly. Perhaps, yes, for her birthday. Yeah. So, but I still acquired them, so I'm still going to count them, and I've got them at the moment. Now, the last question in this tag is about what books do you need to read in the second half of the year? And I could give a very short answer to this question, is that I don't need to read any individual book necessarily. I need to read or I go crazy, but I don't need to read any specific books. And if I were to look at it another way and say, what books do I want to read in the second half of the year? Well, probably about 80. So, and there's lots of them I'm really, really looking forward to. So that's no good as an answer. So what I'm going to give as my answer to this question is some of the things that I've committed to, that I'm definitely committing to read in the second half of the year. Now, one of those is this, Go Down Moses by William Faulkner, because that's for Faulkner in August. There will be a Victober group read. So again, because I'm hosting that, I will definitely read whatever that is. I don't know what it is yet. I have a number of Reading the Globe contemporary strand books still to read, that the other half of the year, so 6. And here's 2 of them, Edo Souls and The Understory. And I will obviously need to read all 6 because, I'm responsible for them. What else? Well, I have a bunch of buddy reads and things that I've committed to, and I absolutely, can and will say I will definitely read all of those. I have a couple of them already. One is this, The Tyranny of Flies by Elaine Villar-Madruga, Cuban writer. That's a buddy read with Thien, coming up fairly soon. This one is a little later in the autumn. The Angel of History by Rabbi Alameddin. I'm reading that with a group on Voxer that earlier in the year read books by Claudia Pinheiro. So that's a must. This is a book that I know I'm going to read because it's Isola by Allegra Goodman, and I know I'm going to read this for 2 reasons. I have to read it because it was another gift. a very kind gift by Ali, avid reader, because she read it and loved it, and because she sees what I recommend on video, she thought this is a book that Ros would love, and she sent me a copy, and was so touched by that. And I think it's going to be one of the books, or the August book, or probably August or September book that Tilly and I read for our reading newish fiction each month, all through this year. So there's some of the books that I've committed to read, and I guess what they reflect is that one of the best things about the first half of this year, in terms of reading for me, and that I expect to be one of the best things about the second half of the year too, is the connections with other readers that I make through BookTube and beyond. And so if you are one of those people that I've read something with, or I'm going to read something with, thank you. If you comment on my videos, I love that conversation. Thank you. If you're in one of the Discord groups or Voxel groups that I'm in, and you know who you are, and thank you for the joy that you brought to the first half of my year, and I know we'll carry on in the second half.